Shalom, today is the 20th of February and I've been studying the book of James, and we specifically are going to look at the last bit of chapter 1, and the one verse that's prominent is where James said, be eager to hear or to listen and slow to speak. Now when you just think about that, he gives us another hint. If you read James chapter 3, where he elaborates a lot on the tongue, and that it is like a rudder of the boat. It's like a little flame that set a large bush alight or firelight, and basically to bridle the tongue, to keep the tongue under control. So I think the slow to speak is in line with containing the tongue. Now, the place where I found slow of speech is when Yahweh called Moses, and then Moses replied and said, I'm a man slow of speech. Now the word slow basically means, from a Hebrew perspective, honorable, heavy, and glory, something of weight, something that can carry a load. And that gives us the idea of the character of Moses. So Yahweh called him because he was a man of slow speech, a man who was rather someone who was listening than someone who was always talking, someone on a soapbox trying to convince people of their ideas. A listener is someone, I believe, who's got more knowledge, because they listen to all conversations, they listen to all the people they interact with, and they listen more than what they speak. And the balance, if you speak more than you listen, when you are actively speaking, it means that you are, during that time, not listening. And the other downfall is, and I caught myself out doing that, while someone else is talking to me, explaining something to me, I'm basically loading my words of what I want to say in the same line of what this person is trying to tell me, or I'm thinking of what I want to say based on what I previously said before they are responding to my comments. And that's also not active listening. And we are all falling short of that. We're all stepping into that trap of not listening. So the main thing to underline here is that we should listen and not be quick to speak. It's best to think about something before you say something. It's actually more wise if you do it like that. And you also get people who just, they just invent words and stories and comments and their thoughts on the run. They think while they say something, while others need to think before they say something. And I think the latter is the most effective one if you think about Moses. So being a man of character, being someone who can carry a heavy load, and that's in context of the glory. Now the glory is also another word for the anointing. So the weightiness of that word slow actually means that you can load this person up with responsibility. You can actually ask them to do something, give them the ability, and they will definitely do that. And you can rely on that. So it's honorable, reliable, and be able to carry something heavy, or be able to receive Yahweh's anointing. And that made Moses, and I think Abram as well, specifically, good candidates for carrying Yahweh's anointing, and to then carry his vision throughout the world within that time frame, and that will also then benefit generations and nations to come. Now, last week we talked about nations, we specifically talk about the stars, the father of lights. The lights refer to the stars refer to the covenant Yahweh made with Moses, where the stars or the lights are referred to the offspring throughout generations, throughout the nations that will come into the covenant. From the starting point, the work and the anointing Yahweh gave on Abraham, and that is a seed that was planted in Abraham, and that birthright, that responsibility, that weightiness of Yahweh's glory manifested through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, later Israel, and then through Israel it came upon Moses, that guided Israel up to the time he handed over to Joshua, and then they entered the promised land. So that's the storyline of the people who had the most weight of the glory. So it started off with Abraham and the covenant promise, the bare branches, as we discussed last time. And then Moses added the leaves, which were basically depicting the commandments, the leaves on the trees, which are symbolized by the tablets. Also, the Mount Sinai experience, which is related to the burning mountain, and Sinai is related to the word thorn, or thorny, or bramble bush, and that is a larger picture of the burning bush, and the bush has leaves upon itself as well, and then there's light radiating from these leaves. So if you think about Yahweh's commandments in the context of the tree, it's basically a tree with illuminated leaves that radiates light. So it's like a shining tree. I think it had the appearance of green and gold just radiating from the leaves. And then this beautiful branch, which is also symbolic of the menorah, that just lit up, and the flames are basically the commandments of Yahweh burning and radiating light into this dark world. And then the third person after Moses that had the weight of the glory is basically symbolized by Joshua. And we all know that Joshua in Hebrew is Yeshua. Prophetically, he portrayed Yeshua, who lead the people into the promised land, into the destination where the presence of the Father is. And that last anointing added the fruit to the tree through giving us His Spirit. And His Spirit then translates the anointing that put the weightiness, the weight of the glory upon those who are honorable, those who are slow of speech, so to speak, those who are receptive for the glory, Yahweh's anointing, that then can take the leaves or the commandments and carry it upon themselves becoming trees, radiating the light, carrying the fruit of the Spirit, planted amongst the nations. So that's a beautiful picture of the three patriarchs that symbolized people of substance, honorable people who could carry the weightiness of the glory of Yahweh, or the anointing, to fulfill those three main tasks or purposes, to complete the plan of Yahweh, to ultimately bring the people back into the Garden of Eden state, which is called the Promised Land or the New Jerusalem. Now, taking one step back, when you look at the word speech, now we looked at the word slow now. Now, speech is the word pay. It's the letter pay. Hey, and it means just speech or words, and it also relates to language. Now, what's interesting about the letter pay, it looks like a man's head with the tongue sticking out. That inside is the tongue, and that symbolizes the mouth of man speaking. And the letter pay, or the mouth, symbolize the origin of words, or where the words utter from man. And the symbolism of that is related to the tongue. So now we connect speech with the tongue, Now the tongue is the word lashon. The lashon means either tongue, it can mean nation, it can also mean language. Also an object of licking that has to do with eating. And those three are related because we now can make the connection between the nations back to the promise made with Abraham, which connected the stars. We have the language, which relates to the Hebrew language, which I will share a bit later on in the next discussion, where I compare the two words olam and Hebrew. Olam means eternity or eternal, and the word Hebrew, and how they are related. But that's for another topic. That's very interesting. Now, so the connection between the nations and the covenant and the people coming in, the language, which basically I believe referred to Hebrew. Hebrew is the eternal language. I'll just give you a little snippet. Hebrew is comes from the word ivri, which is eber, that means regions beyond. Now, Abraham was the first Hebrew. So that implies that Moses was the second Hebrew, and Joshua or Yeshua was the third Hebrew. The prominent, chosen or anointed ones with a specific anointing that set the stage for the fulfillment of the promise. And all the others in between were basically, just like the 70 elders, received some of the anointing of Moshe in order to facilitate what Yahweh wanted Moshe to do, but in a larger scale. In the same way, Yahweh gave some of the anointing on Yeshua to his followers to be able to do what Yeshua started. So we've got exactly the same purpose and goal as Yeshua. Just like the 70 elders had the same purpose and goal of Moses, and just like Israel had the same purpose and goals as Abraham. So you can see it started with one, and then it multiplied. And then it started with one again, multiplied to 70, and then it started with one Yeshua, and it multiplied to an uncountable or a number of stars or people that you cannot count. And the reason he couldn't count it, because he was looking at it in a certain point in time, and the work of Messiah goes across all generations. So I can only see the people within my generation, but 100 years back there was someone else anointed that had a snapshot of his generations, and if you add up all the generations, you get the ones that I cannot count from my perspective, but collectively it can be counted from Yahweh's perspective. So that's just another spin on it. So going back to the word tongue, lashon. Now lashon has got another meaning. When you add the letter hey at the end, it becomes lashonah. That is a female form of lashon, and that means fire, or the wedge, specifically the wedge in between, and that has to do with separation, separating something. Now that's a very interesting concept, because if you connect the language to lashonah, you get the means of separating people of one language into multiple nations through changing their tongue, their lashon, their language. So you see immediately the connection there. So the wedge is connected to the flame, and the flame is exactly the same as a wedge. Now the wedge you can compare to the wedge shape of an axe, where you can split wood into two pieces. It's also related to a sword or a knife, where you can cut something in two halves. And that concept of to cut is one of the meanings of the words, let me just think, which one is it? It's bina, which means understanding. And understanding, the connected meanings to understanding is to separate something so you can look inside or you can look underneath the surface, and that will give you the understanding. It's something that is hidden that is now revealed. Cutting open a fruit, the fruit is something you eat, but the substance within is the actual thing that you need, which is the seed, which we discussed last week. So the understanding comes through the separation comes through the wedge. The wedge is connected to the tongue and also to the flame. So there's also, if you look at the book of Revelation, the judgment, or I will refer to it as the final separation, is also connected to the concept of fire. Now, fire links to holiness, but fire in this concept relates to separation, specifically separation of the nations, or separation of the sheep and the goats. And they will be separated through fire. The other thing that we read about in Luke is how Yahweh will judge his people. He said that everything that is not of him, every thing that he did not ask you to do, will be like stubble, it will be like wood, it will be consumed, but you will be saved but through fire. And that fire refers to the separation process, where the darkness and the light will be separated, where the chaff and the wheat will be separated, where the substance, which has to do with Yahweh's weightiness, his glory, his anointing, his purpose, and his will upon your life will stand. But everything that is from you, from your heart, from your evil tongue, from everything that's to do with your fleshly side will be separated. And then the part of you that will stay, that part will be restored back to him in the concept, or the place called the New Jerusalem, the Promised Land, or the Garden of Eden. So that's a very interesting connection there with the flame and the tongue being a wedge. And the wedge is separation. Separation has to do with understanding, revealing the seed behind everything. Now the seed can also reveal, in the same context, if you draw it into our actions, the seed is the motive behind the action. Because when you plant a seed, it's the motive, and it brings forth fruit, which is the action. So there's always a motive behind the action. There's always a seed behind the fruit. And we made the connection last time with the fruit and labor being connected. So you bring fruit into this world, just like a woman brings a baby into this world through a laboring process. And labor is also connected to actions. So everything you do that is in line with Yahweh's will is from his seed, his origin. And everything that you do according to the flesh is from the opposite side, the opposing side, the Esau part of you, the one which is the man of the field, the person who is worldly, the side of you that's easily swayed by the seed of the serpent, the Nachash, anything that is opposing Yahweh, any darkness, any lie, anything that's not related to Yahweh. And that will be finally separated at the end through this concept of fire and the wedge. Now that's Lashonah, the female form of tongue. Now what's also interesting, if you look at the root word of Lashon, I think it's Lashan, that means to condemn and to slander. So the core, or the seed behind the tongue, is negative. The only one that can give a bit more of a positive spin to it is to condemn, because a righteous person can condemn the wicked. That's the only positive thing. But that is in the context of judgment and separation. But the other meaning, slander, that's just negative. You can't give that any positive spin on it. So the tongue is related to judgment, to separation. It's to do with fire, heat. It's to do with holiness. So part of your life that you live now, or the purpose of your life, is for you to partake in the separation process willingly. You must ask Yahweh, I am the clay, you are the potter, for me. You must ask Yahweh, just like David asked Yahweh, showing me what is within me and remove that from me, so I can have a clean heart, a pure heart before you. And that is our free choice to make, is to willingly partake in the purification process, which relates to holiness, which relates to the fire, which relates to the separation. Now that separation of fire is also, if you pull that into the sacrificial system, fire is always present within sacrifices. Ask yourself why. Because wire separates. He separates something that is physical into something that is physical. It's like separating the waters from the waters, which is the link between the heavens, Shamayim, which is the word Mayim with a shin added, and shin represents the fire. So the fire upon the water, if you connect fire with water, it will turn to steam, and then it will separate the waters from the waters. So you get that in the creation picture as well. So the separation of the animal that's physical, that will go up into smoke and an aroma and ashes, is then separating something that is alive into something that is dead, the ashes, and something that is of a higher medium, that is the smoke and the flavor, which is more of a spiritual concept that connects to Yahweh, because he said he could smell the sweet fragrance and then he rest from his anger. So any sacrifice made the connection between the physical and the spiritual through the separation process, that where you need fire in order to do that. We also had the concept of strange fire. 2 sons of Aaron died because they brought strange fire. So there was a separation process within the Levites, and I believe they were leaders. I believe that the sons of Aaron, they were leaders compared to the other Levites, and Yahweh separated them, and he's more harsh on leadership, on those who teach others. That's why James also said, do not all try to be teachers, because you will receive a greater judgment, just like Aaron's sons. And the fire will be used to separate you. It can be that fire will purify you. Whatever's left can still grow up to be able to carry something weighty, the anointing, and still do something for Yahweh. But he is more strict with those he chose, who are related to the word slow, weightiness, his glory, and his anointing, for that reason. So you can see the connection between slow and speech. Extrapolate that and link that to the tongue, coloring all the symbolism that James is also using in James chapter 3, talking specifically about the tongue. Now there's a lot of other verses in Proverbs and in Psalms that actually warn us against the tongue and what the power of the tongue is. And we should be careful how we use our tongue. And it's better not to speak, not to say anything, because you've got a less chance of sinning if you do that, than someone who's always talking. They've got a better chance to sin. So that's why it's better to be a person that is slow of speech, like Moses. And he received a very great anointing because of that character that he had. So that's all I want to share today. That was my study of this morning, and I just want to capture some thoughts on the study, which will most probably end up in the study I will present within the coming weeks. So I hope you have a great day, and speak to you soon. Shalom.